What then becomes of Andrew and the crown? Is this the greatest problem the royal family has encountered in contemporary times? How long will the king be able to maintain his position that it would be improper to discuss the issue further? To be honest, Prince Andrew interviewed me for the position. One of the questions you folks asked was, how would you improve images of members of the royal family? Additionally, a picture of Prince Andrew on a yacht with music and many of topless people was just released. Women, well, sir, I wouldn't be photographed with topless women and appear in newspapers, I responded. After that, there was a chilly stillness, and I thought, oh gosh, that's me, that's curtains for me. However, I was still hired. Yes, but you can't really distance yourself from your own brother. But what a difference a year makes, you know. A year ago, Andrew was contentedly nestled in the breathtaking surroundings when the unique smell arrived. First, long before anyone really understood what was happening, and it felt unquestionably important by the time the bigger picture started to take shape. It was obvious that this was neither a quiet relocation nor a routine transfer. It had the impact of a purposeful declaration. At first, residents were unaware of removal trucks, increased security, or other changes in the Marsh Farm area. Rather than, they were drawn in by a foul, thick odor that clung to the fields and the surrounding air. Sparking investigations into the strange events, the whole situation became even more bizarre as its origin was discovered, swiftly turning what had started out as a tense royal man oeuvre into a story told in whispers. Greetings from Crowner, the place where you may dissect royal drama piece by piece. You won't want to miss the impending disclosures, I promise. To keep up with the most recent developments, noteworthy allegations, and ongoing royal news, subscribe now. More than 24 tankers were reportedly frequently coming in and going out. Land behind the home, leaving a staggering 150,000 gallons of liquid manure behind. The timing was what really alarmed them because this wasn't your typical agricultural activity from months earlier. For Andrew, however, it has been his complete ruin. You know, he's lost everything because of Grace. According to reports, everything was happening right as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was getting used to his new surroundings, including the arrival of his possessions, the installation of new gates, and the finishing touches to the house. Of course, the obvious question came up. Was there a clear message being conveyed, or was this just a coincidence? The official explanation, which emphasized organic farming, sustainable land management, and soil nutrient replenishment, seemed entirely plausible. Beneath the polished language, though, one thing is still glaringly obvious. Just as a disgraced royal was moving in, 150,000 gallons of manure had been dumped all over the place. At that point, the topic of agriculture gave way to. Much more crucial, 3 sizable removal trucks from Gander and White, a company known for managing priceless artwork, rare collections, and other expensive items, are said to have arrived at Marsh Farm at the same time with an almost unsettling discretion. This immediately indicated that this was a transfer of a whole personal life rather than just a simple move. The contents, which included priceless artworks that had once adorned Royal Lodge as well as other treasured objects connected to Andrew's former life, were soon the subject of conjecture. The sharp contrast added to the strangeness. On one side, priceless items that are usually connected to wealth and prestige are handled with great care. There is no way it could be worse. That is simply disastrous for one's reputation. And the world perceives that, and I genuinely believe that there is a danger question because we in the media don't really understand how the rest of the world and people under the age of 40 see this and what they think about it. On the other hand, we saw fields covered in manure, a strong odor in the air, and a scene that was far different from the immaculate, refined royal image that one could expect. It was impossible to ignore the striking contrast between these components, which gave the tableau as a whole an odd, almost symbolic character. The mystery was only made more complex by Marsh Farm's planning. This wasn't some forgotten farmhouse that had just reopened. Builders apparently worked on it for weeks, changing the layout, adding new carpets, repainting the interiors, and even remodeling the outside grounds. Then came the massive wooden security gates, which seemed to announce this as a serious long-term facility and were more defensive than decorative. Andrew wasn't only moving, he was moving into a completely new way of living. According to reports, he was abandoning the opulent 30-room size of Royal Lodge in favor of a 5-bedroom farmhouse surrounded by operational farming, organic systems, and the lingering effects of those tanker deliveries. I believe you recall that striking picture and video of Andrew stepping off the ship with the flower in his mouth when he returned from the Falklands War. He was a hero, you know. He was definitely someone who was brave, gutsy, and willing to risk his life, in my opinion. According to those close to him, the change was quite difficult for him. It was a drastic loss of room, comfort, and height rather than a normal shrinking. This was highlighted by even small elements, such as the fact that his famous collection of 72 teddy bears had to be dramatically reduced to just one. The extreme extent of this shift was demonstrated by the drop from 72 to just one teddy bear, which became a moving emblem of the entire upheaval. It didn't stop there. According to reports, the substantial household support that Andrew had previously commanded had disappeared, to be replaced by sporadic, meager help. Such a change would be extremely disconcerting, irritating, and painfully revealing to many observers for someone used to continuous service, strictly regulated routines, and a closely controlled atmosphere. Then there was the uncompromising element of public opinion, which no refurbishment could change. The response outside the mansion was anything but friendly. Locals in neighbouring Kings Lynn were characterised as at best apathetic, at worst overtly antagonistic, and in certain cases still demanding justice, accountability, and significant consequences. One thing became very evident from this. The action had undoubtedly not erased the past, whatever it was meant to resolve. Are we getting close to a point where this cannot be recovered, don't you know? And the fact that it goes far deeper than Andrew, because there will now be a lot of questions about what the monarch ever knew. For the reasons David has stated, the king is unable to testify in court because the king brings the prose that pursued him persistently all the way to Marsh Farm. The deep quiet that surrounded the whole thing made it even more bizarre. Since his return from police questioning, he has not made any public appearances, made any official remarks, acknowledged anything, or done anything. Everything is happening behind closed doors. Moves, modifications, fresh arrangements, all without a word. People naturally start asking more in-depth inquiries when every detail is this subdued, this well-handled, and this carefully controlled. So is this really merely a move, or is this something more intentional? It stops feeling like luck and starts to resemble purposeful positioning when you look at the entire background, which includes a disgraced royal, a forced relocation, a severe drop in lifestyle, a chilly public response, and those unforgettable 150,000 gallons of manure. It doesn't seem like a new beginning. It's quieter, colder, and much more definitive. The story eventually changes from a man moving to a new home to a man who is purposefully and completely repositioned. The more closely one examines this pattern, the more computed each component that is present. Years earlier, the estate had already made the switch to organic farming, turning the land into a productive system focused on crops, cattle, natural fertilizer, and sustainability. This seems responsible and contemporary on paper. We are aware that Prince Andrew received up to £12 million from Virginia Giaffa, according to numerous reports, and we are aware that the Queen provided a significant portion of that funding, but now put Andrew firmly in the centre of it all, surrounded by tankers, tractors, fertilised fields, and unrelenting agricultural routines, and all of a sudden the tone of the entire affair changes dramatically. This is the point at which the enormity becomes really noteworthy. This is not a small rural adjustment. Approximately 500 cattle are reportedly producing enough waste to support a large-scale farming enterprise, and plans for a slurry lagoon the size of 3 Olympic swimming pools were approved earlier this year. That is really huge. By any standards, indicating that Andrew isn't just living next to a farm, he lives next to a serious agricultural system, which brings everything back to that stench. The one thing the people couldn't ignore: were meant to spend the Easter vacations at Wood Farm, but their brother Andrew hasn't moved in time. Although officials may describe this as regular organic practice, the locals see it as something far more immediate, a heavy, intrusive, and unavoidable presence. Such a setting is more than just inconvenient for someone who has become accustomed to carefully controlled surroundings, filtered comforts, well-kept grounds, and strict seclusion. It acts as a daily reminder that his preferences are no longer the center of his existence. This is the exact reason for the striking difference. Royal Lodge was large, secluded, and cut off from the outer world. On the other hand, Marsh Farm is exposed, useful, and inextricably connected to the surrounding area. This signifies a total transformation of identity rather than only a reduction in size. According to insiders, Andrew's long-standing annoyance may actually stem from this fundamental change. We had a smaller royal family that was very different from the one we see now. Today, the day when Andrew was arrested, will likely be remembered as a significant turning point. He hasn't only given up room. He has given up authority, his public persona, and the ability to influence his immediate surroundings. Every room is filled with this deep sense of loss. Instead of allowing for unrestricted pleasure, such limited places require choices, and those choices are evident everywhere. In the empty corners, one can practically feel them. The things that were missing, the overwhelming sense of a life that had been painstakingly reduced to fit into something more constrained, tighter, and smaller. However, the most important detail might not even be located within the house. It is outside, where the terrain seems to define the reality that Andrew now lives in rather than just enclosing him. The same unspoken message seems to be repeated by every passing tanker, every treated field, and every floating wave of that strong odor. And once more, I believe that in order to be fair and to comply with the law, I must state that Andrew has not been found guilty of anything and refutes all of the accusations made against him. But it's obvious that something has changed. This is your life now, and the public looks on with a much colder attitude that is characterized by detachment, skepticism, and silent criticism rather than fascination or warmth. Residents in the area allegedly want no part in the drama that is taking place. Some want separation, while others continue to demand accountability, which significantly changes the mood around the relocation. Usually, moving is thought to provide a new beginning and a chance to start over, but this doesn't feel that way. It seems more like confinement, as though he's been put somewhere. Instead of picking it, the narrative feels so heavily burdened because the location itself seems to impose constraints. Then the silence returns. Andrew doesn't say anything despite all the movement, conjecture, and evident changes. No explanation, no defense, and no apparent attempt to take back control of the narrative. I adore the monarchy. How much long-term harm has the Andrew affair caused to the institution and brand? Without a doubt, it has been the largest crisis for the monarchy since the abdication crisis in 1936. Silence does not provide tranquility in such an unstable circumstance. Everything is amplified by it. People will always fill in the blanks on their own when there are no solutions. Was the manure's timing really just standard farming, or did it have a more specific purpose? The timing wouldn't feel so exact if this were only a practical matter. The scale would not seem so daunting if it were exclusively agricultural, and yet here we are, watching a former senior royal living in a farmstead, overshadowed by an unavoidable procedure. And for that same reason, this tale never fails to enthrall. It doesn't feel at all random, too many details line up too precisely. The relocation, the remodeling, the gates, the general quiet, the particular odor, and the enormity of the farming activities all around him. You are aware that an investigation is underway into Andrew. There are repercussions in our nation. To engaging in allegedly improper behavior, I am aware that there are repercussions for these claimed acts, even though we are still unsure. The police come knocking, regardless of who you are. In the United States, that does not now occur. When taken as a whole, these elements create a reality that is much harder to ignore than when taken separately. It starts to feel more like a carefully planned new life than a simple living arrangement. The fact that Andrew seems to have no way to resist makes it even more amazing. The larger setting is unchangeable, even if the house itself is renovated and its furnishings are updated. He cannot change the surrounding agricultural cycle to suit his tastes, stop the tankers, or move the fields. Yes, it's important to remind folks that Andrew is still eighth in line for the throne, which is just strange and remarkable. But doesn't it seem like the monarch is essentially saying, "Okay, you can have him," in his remarks? This significant loss of control might be the most striking feature of all, because it must be an agonizing decline for someone who has grown up in privileged and protected surroundings to be forced to adjust to an uncompromising reality. As a result, whether Marsh Farm is merely habitable is no longer the crucial concern. The question is whether this specific location was ever meant to do more than just house him. Because the more this story develops, the more it seems that the place itself is a crucial component of the message, a subtle but clear statement about his position, the limitations placed on him, and his current situation. The way these stories unfold, whether they are about Andrew Mountbatten or anything else, makes them appear in the media as scandal stories or institutional stories. And the biggest scandal is that every element seems more significant and less accidental if you start looking at it in this way. Marsh Farm is not just smaller than Royal Lodge. It sends out a completely different signal. Royal Lodge communicated ideas of luxury, insulation, and exalted position. In contrast, Marsh Farm discusses practicalities, restrictions, and a life that is now surrounded by clear boundaries. This is a significant change that the public may easily understand without the palace providing an official explanation. Additionally, the setting's mere ordinariness has an almost brutal feel. That may sound strange, but it has a lot of significance. A working farm creates the exact opposite of the distance that grand royal residences naturally create from ordinary realities. However, it appears that Andrew has access to a palace in Abu Dhabi. They have contacts in Switzerland as well, so he has to choose between a hot climate that brings weather, smells, mud, machines, strict timetables, and continual interruption right to one's door. It doesn't care about one's reputation, status, or comfort. It just keeps going in the same unrelenting manner. This type of everyday reality can seem far harsher than any official disciplinary measure to someone who has spent years in restricted, protected circumstances. And maybe that's why this action is still being addressed in such harsh, conclusive terms. It is not overtly loud, but it is really powerful. Even though it doesn't come with widespread criticism, it surely feels like a significant message. There began to spread negativity about Prince Andrew's trip. As a result, he was traveling extensively in both his role as a special trade envoy and as a member of the royal family. Although Andrew is still officially on royal territory, the current situation tells a quite different tale. He is still part of the monarchy, but he is no longer at its center, and that might be the most obvious message of all. Here, the story goes beyond just an odd property tale and starts to take on the appearance of something far more important. We might be seeing a total redefinition rather than just a relocation. The opulence of his old home no longer frames Andrew. His immediate environment now frames him, and this change communicates volumes without the need for an official announcement. The powerful power of location, symbolism, and quiet has always been recognized by the monarchs. It doesn't always fight verbally. At times, it uses routine, architecture, distance, and mood to convey its point. Even while Marsh Farm is fully operational, it doesn't convey status the way Royal Lodge used to. Rather, it conveys a more subdued sense of control. Because the transfer feels more like containment than comfort, this is the very reason why people still attach so much significance to it, and that interpretation grows more persuasive the longer the quiet lasts. No justification. There was a former senior royal living in a much smaller location, surrounded by working land, public skepticism, and an atmosphere that seemed to highlight his lowered status every day. No pushback, no obvious attempt to change public view. The move no longer seems transient at this point. It starts to feel like a last repositioning, subtle at first but harsh in its consequences. According to people close to Andrew and the Queen, this relationship is harming the monarchy since he hasn't been told the whole picture. She wasn't listening, in my opinion, and by the time she was 90, she didn't want to hear it. And that might be the most remarkable feature of all, how little drama the palace really needs to put on when everything is communicated by the scene itself. There hasn't been a big statement, a formal reprimand, or a public humiliation in front of cameras. Nevertheless, the message still strikes a deep chord. Maury can be expressed by a smaller home, a harsher atmosphere, a colder public attitude, and total silence from those in positions of power than by any formal declaration. For this reason, the story nonetheless manages to feel both eerie and captivating at the same time. It has nothing to do with a single foul odor or an uncomfortable move. It concerns what happens when a person's status irreversibly declines, but they are nevertheless expected to live with a lingering remembrance of their former self. Marsh Farm does not allow that recollection to fade. If anything, every day the contrast gets sharper. The observed descent seems more obvious in the more ordinary settings. Therefore, the question of whether this was just pragmatic nearly misses the main point. Practical decisions can nonetheless have a great deal of symbolic significance, and in this case, it seems impossible to ignore the symbolism. Although he hasn't been completely excluded, Andrew seems to have been placed in a position that represents a very different rank, a very different tolerance threshold, and a very different future. It's possible that the monarchy has already expressed its clear stance in a quiet, forceful, and silent manner. One thing is impossible to ignore in the middle of all the rumors, insider information, and growing quiet. Here, something significant is changing. These days, it's not just about a house, a move, or a reputation. Andrew's place in the royal system itself seems to have fundamentally changed. When he got close to the middle, he appears to be confined to the outskirts, carefully controlled, and surrounded by distance rather than prestige symbols. And maybe that's the true story, not just the scent, not just the tankers, not even the actual move, but what it all seems to stand for. If you take everything away, only one unpleasant reality is left. Finding him a new place to live was never the only goal. It was about accurately redefining his current position. What do you think? Is Andrew's royal story coming to an end? Narrative, or just the beginning of something more important? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For more content, please like, subscribe, share, and comment if you thought this video was enlightening.